Monty is with me for another Being in the Middle chat. He is a timeless leader. Many of you know him from his days at Ford, but since the days of Ford and what he's learned and what he's passing on to others has been a true delight to watch as a friend and industry colleague. And we are virtual today, but Scott and I finally live in the same state, which is cool. So Scott, thanks for joining me today after we had our lunch the other week.
It is nice to be with you again, Blajitsa. It's, I don't care where or how we meet up, whatever technology it takes. I mean, obviously in person, it's always delightful, but for me, timeless leadership is about being flexible with whatever the world happens to throw at you and knowing where your values are based and focusing on those relationships that make leadership so important.
And we're going to talk a lot about leadership on this chat, but of course, this is a Gen X chat talking about all of the things. And I like to use these discussions as a bit of a reunion and going back down memory lane about much of which connected many of myself and the folks on this call. We happen to be Gen Xers, but we also happen to be folks who were part and are still part of that digital thread, digital marketing, digital communications. So you and I knew of each other when things were starting to shift and really move quickly, finally, in the world of, as they say, social media. And you came in to Ford and you literally started their social media group, their social media division. You were in communications. But before Ford, I believe you're from Boston. Is that right?
That's right. I spent 20 years in Boston, went to college there, stayed on afterwards. I actually got my undergraduate degree in classics. I went on to get a master's in medical science and an MBA in healthcare administration. So I figured Boston would be a great place to stick around for healthcare, for high tech, for digital. I moved through all of those industries, eventually landing on social media at an agency. And this was back in 2005, 2007, that time period there. And I saw where things were going, but the folks in the agency just couldn't see a business model around it at the time. And I left and eventually got recruited by Ford Motor Company. And in the discussions, I said, well, I'm working virtually currently in late 2007. Do I have to move to Detroit for this job? And the answer was,
I love your honesty. I love your honesty. That's great.
Well, Detroit wasn't trending so hip and trendy at the time, shall we say.
Yeah.
And coming from Boston, a city that, I thought had everything to offer it, I was uncertain. Now, I called a good friend and colleague who I had known when he was chief blogger at IBM. He had gone on to lead social media at General Motors, Christopher Barger. And I said, look, you've made the transition from New York to Detroit. Give an East Coaster a break here. Help me understand exactly what the auto industry is like, what Detroit is like. And to his credit, he laid it all out for me. And I saw nothing but opportunity ahead. And Ford, of course, at the time was in a really rough spot. And I viewed Ford and its plan with the leadership under Alan Mulally, who was from outside the auto industry, where he was taking Ford and the plans that he had in place and the communication that they had. I saw that just dovetailing perfectly with where social media was going and the opportunity that we had. And I saw a great convergence of the two, of Ford's success and of social media hitting the mainstream around 2010. And that's exactly what happened. And we were just off to the races.
They say things about opportunity, luck. You hear different mantras about, was it luck, opportunity, so on. But it sounds to me from a Ford Motor Company perspective, those two things happening at the same time were nothing but positive. Looking back at 2010, I don't know if a lot of people would have been able to read the tea leaves in that way. Because if you remember 2010, yes, Twitter was around, folks were rolling on Twitter. But I think back in 2010, people were still LOLing with, I don't care about you eating a cheeseburger at lunch. So here you were, you're moving to Detroit and you're working for Ford Motor Company, which is this OG car company. And then it's the social component. Walk me through you coming into the role and how you started to, and of course, under Alan Mulally's vision was helpful. How did you start incorporating some of these more forward-thinking or fast or modern approaches to communications, the creator of the Mustang.
Yeah. Well, so the timeline is I got to Ford July 14th, 2008.
Wow, you know the date.
Ford, yeah, and I will tell you why I remember. So Alan had promised to make Ford profitable by 2009. That late 2007 call where I asked if I had to move to Detroit, I actually turned down pursuing the opportunity at that point. I didn't feel the timing was right. I didn't have a good enough feel for Ford. But of course, once you've been introduced to a concept, the seed is planted, and you have bias towards seeing information. So I was suddenly seeing more about Ford. The thing is, I was seeing good news about Ford. Q1 rolled around. Ford actually posted a $100 million quarterly profit in 2008. I thought, wow, that's great. They're ahead of schedule. So we reconnected and the offer was made. And, I was just supremely impressed with everyone I found there. And with now, I got there on July 14th. 10 days later, on July 24th, it was time for Q2 earnings. And Ford posted its $8.7 billion quarterly loss. Um, and I called my wife back in Boston and I said, don't finish packing. I may be back before the summer is out because things aren't looking too good. And that is when the whole car apocalypse started, where the auto industry started to crater, the overall financial industry started to crater as well. And we were well on our way to the beginning of the Great Recession. So we had to do things just by necessity. We did what I call digital hand-to-hand combat. I had a personal presence on Twitter in particular. That was the zeitgeist of the time. We were still fighting to get control over not only our Twitter handle, but of a Facebook page. Right? This is real early days. And so what I did is I used my own personal brand to stand up as a representative of Ford and engage people online in forums, in blog post comments on Twitter. And I just kept telling the Ford story. And we went to Congress that fall. I'm
Well,
sure you remember the time when the big three auto executives flew the private jets to Washington to ask for money, which was not a good look. We had to handle the blowback on that. The second meeting, they actually took a hybrid vehicle. They drove all the way to Washington. And Ford was there not to ask for money, but to stand up for the industry, because Ford had already taken out its home improvement loan of $26 billion 2 years before and was using that to execute its plan. We were there to stand up for the other two who would take us down with them and the entire auto industry infrastructure, the supply chain infrastructure, if they went down. So we were fighting for the heart and soul of the automotive industry. And we had an opportunity to tell our story. So what did we do? We put all kinds of Ford executives up on YouTube and on a blog that we had just constructed over Thanksgiving weekend to tell the Ford story. And that was the name of it, fordstory.com. And the thing is, it was completely in line with the strategy that Alan had set out, the vision and strategy that he had set out, and it was consistent with Ford's history. Because who was associated with Ford Motor Company for its first 40 years? Henry Ford. He was the face of the company. The Ford family still owned the majority of the company. So by definition, it was a very personal company, a company that was associated with people. And we made sure with social media that individuals, executives around the company got to be the faces of Ford, to humanize it and make it more relatable in that particular time.
that's fantastic. Scott, one little note. Just received a message. Is there a way on your end to increase the volume of your mic?
Sure.
Well, that worked. What you just did seemed a little louder.
Is that good?
A little bit more?
A little bit louder now.
Thanks, Mike. My buddy Mike just sent me a note.
Mike, how appropriate. Thanks, Mike.
Yes, I think there we go. There we go. Thanks, Mike. What's okay? So then you started at the same time that there was this goal in place, a roadmap for the company to tell its story and to gain that type of traction back and trust. What was it like
That's right.
to convince executives, you said, to get on YouTube, to have like literally the face, not just the PR representative, but the face? Because as we think about, I shouldn't do this in quotes, but social media, because back in the day, people did social media. What was it like to convince folks to put their own personalities out there and not have the cloak, if you will, of a press release, and really have the personality of the person appealing to the public about the change of the company?
It really depended on the executive. And I think part of our strength was figuring out who did well in what format. We had a very soft-spoken engineer by the name of Derek Kuzak, who is the chief designer in charge of product development. And he was somebody who worked better in print than on video, right? We had, of course, Alan Mullally, our CEO, who was just so charismatic. We wanted to get him on video. As a matter of fact, there was a time when I went to Alan during a big press scrum. We would have these press events. We'd preview our vehicles for the automotive and business press before the auto shows so they could get everything ready. And they would come in and they would ask Alan all kinds of questions. So in come Alan and Bill Ford, shoulder to shoulder. And I'm there on my BlackBerry to kind of date myself, tweeting what's going on, live tweeting. And I was like, oh my God, Alan and Bill just walked in. And one of my followers, and I don't remember who, but I wish I could remember because I would send them a thank you gift, suggested, hey, can you get Alan to answer some questions? And I'm like, that's genius. So I go up to Alan's handler and I said, hey, when Alan's done with the press scrum, can I ask him some questions for Twitter? And she goes, yeah, ask him. So he comes out and he goes, hey, Scott, how's it going? And I go, great, Alan. Would you be willing to answer some questions on Twitter? And without missing a beat, he goes, absolutely. What's Twitter? And I go,
sorry,
this guy has this spirit. He just wants to talk with people. And I'm like, great. And I explained it to him quickly. He goes, okay, let's do this. So we fire off a few questions that I fielded from my audience. And we got to one. We had time for one more. And it was this. Alan, what kind of car do you drive? And I looked at his handler as if to say, is this kosher? I don't want to, give away any corporate secrets or jeopardize Alan's security or safety. And she goes, watch this, ask him. I go, Alan, what kind of car do you drive? And he grabs me by the forearm, right? And he squeezes with like to accentuate every word that he's saying in the sentence. And he goes, Scott, I drive a different car every day. And I go, that's great. You experience the entire lineup of our vehicles. And he squeezes harder. And he goes, no, I drive the competition. Right?
Wow.
This naive Bostonian had come to Detroit, assuming the myopia that everyone assumed, that Detroit was just focused only on itself. And Alan just blew that assumption out of the water. And I think that was one of the most profound things that we could have seen. And, we had an amazing reaction to that. First CEO of a major, Fortune 500 company doing a live Q&A on Twitter. So I went back the next quarter and we actually took a video of Alan doing a live Q&A again, one that was more well planned out. But I took a video so people could see Alan's personality behind the scenes as he was answering these questions. And it just lended to the credibility. It lended to Alan's likability factor, if you could add anything to that, and just showed that we were willing to engage people. We were willing to show people the human side of Ford, and we were willing to take people behind the scenes to give them a sense as to how the sausage was made for the marketing and communication geeks out there.
Well, then, and that to me too, Alan seems to be an analytical guy. Would you agree with that? Is he
100%.
process
he
driven?
was an engineer, and he loved data. He loved the process. Absolutely.
But it's interesting because in many cases, when we think about analytical people, engineers, hard facts, A plus B is C, and that's how it's going to be. And I need to know everything in line. What you're telling me is that he also, from a leadership standpoint, seemed to have a bit of curiosity. You had said, hey, man, well, not like that, but you know what I mean? Would you answer questions on Twitter? And he went, what's Twitter? But he didn't shoot it down. He had that curiosity about, oh, what's this thing? And then you conducted it in a way that was, I would say, low risk. It was just text. of course, and he had his people to help mitigate the questions. He
Yeah.
saw the results, they were positive, and then the next quarter you went to video. In that sense of leadership, and in that sense in what you experienced with Alan, let's bring it a bit fast forward, because I like to hop topics, but I bring it back to center. What are your thoughts on today's leaders as it relates to that type of curiosity, but getting the data you want for that Excel spreadsheet box when it comes to CAC or ROI or year over year increases? What are your thoughts there about how Alan approached it, with you there seeing it? Fast forward to today's executive leader and what's changed, what could be different, and so on. I'm really curious on your thoughts with that.
Curiosity, I think, is one of the most important traits of a leader. Somebody who is always interested. And curiosity goes hand in hand with learning. I actually just received a book in the mail yesterday from one of my former podcast guests who's going to be on again on timeless leadership, David Novak. David used to be the CEO of Yum Brands, the parent company of Pizza Hut, KFC, Taco Bell, etc. And his first book was How Leaders Lead. But the second one is How Leaders Learn. Right. And I think learning and curiosity go hand in hand. And any great leader is a lifelong learner. And I got that from Alan every single time I had an interaction with him, because he would pepper people with questions. He didn't profess to have all the answers, particularly as an aeronautical engineer who's a fish out of water in an automotive company. So he relied on the expertise of everybody around him, the whole team he assembled. He knew he had the best experts, and his job was to ask questions to bring out the best in them. That's exactly what I do with my coaching with leaders. I ask a lot of questions. I don't profess to be an engineer or a superb marketer or whatever the industry happens to be or the practice happens to be. I'm just there to help these individuals recognize what they have in themselves and to focus on those strengths and to amplify them. And that's exactly what Alan did. There's a great book that was written about the whole Ford experience, and I lived through a lot of the meetings in the book. It's called American Icon. It was written by Bryce Hoffman. And Bryce has a great quote about Alan in the book. He said he asked more questions than he answered, and he seemed genuinely interested in what people had to say, be they world leaders or waitresses. And that's just it. You can ask questions, but you really need to be ready to listen, to receive those answers, and to translate them into where you need to take the rest of your team.
And I have to call out, if you haven't noticed Scott's background, it's very classical in terms of what he has in his office. And I mention this because I also appreciate Scott because of his love of history, the classics and so on. And you mentioned Yum Brands. And I have to ask you if you've seen, I love the History Channel. I kind of like the OG History Channel that was always on, but now the History Channel has these segments. Have you seen the History Channel about the food that made us? There is a whole story about the story of Kentucky Fried Chicken. So it's the story of Kellogg. It's the story of Kellogg, Hershey, Mars, Heinz, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and how all of those brands came to be with innovation, so on and so forth. Sidebar, Heinz actually created the first factory using electricity. Ford had a factory as well, but the Heinz story is amazing. But you mentioned Yum Brands, KFC, the story of how KFC came to be. When I finished watching, I told my husband, I want some Kentucky Fried Chicken, because I was so enamored with the story. So I had to just mention the History Channel. They have phenomenal series, and that's one of my favorites. Curiosity and always asking those questions and being a good leader. You answered that piece, but let's dig a bit deeper, because you have been around the block a lot, conferences, corporate agencies, and so on. And you have, I think, the benefit working for yourself to see a lot of things from a lot of people. What are your thoughts on the current state of leadership, especially as it relates to our generation? So we are Gen Xers. Are you seeing Gen Xers continue in roles of leadership? Are you seeing them shift? Are you seeing that, Gen Xers have to incorporate a certain leadership style for other generations? What have you noticed in the field of marketing and comms with leadership today as it relates to so many generations that we hear about all the time?
Yeah. And well, I think this
Loaded question, I know, but
the
you know I'm going
same
to ask it.
no. No, I mean it's a perfect question because like with everything else, Gen X gets overlooked.
Mm,
There's a whole narrative about how the boomer executives are getting ready for uh, Gen Z to come in, and or for millennials to come in, to take over the next wave of executive leadership roles. I'm like, well, there's one in between here in case you haven't noticed. I don't think it's because they aren't ready, that Gen X isn't ready. I think they absolutely are. It's just we've always been a quietly capable generation. We just go about our lives, we go about our work, we don't make a fuss, we just do what needs to get done. We manage up, we manage down. This is being in the middle.
yeah.
You're managing aging parents, you're managing kids who are getting ready to graduate. You've got crises at all levels. And at the same time, you're expected to show up and be capable and crucial at the job that you have. So I don't think Gen X really draws a lot of attention to itself. It's just by design. That's who we are. Doesn't mean that these aren't people that are inhabiting executive roles. I think they do. And if anything, I think Gen X is probably in the best position for some of these leadership roles because they know how to manage so many different levels and so many different stakeholders, if you will. If you want to translate personal life stakeholders to the business world, it's a matter of being able to take in all of these different perspectives, not make yourself the center of attention, ask a lot of questions, see what people need, and delegate to get things done. I think all of these are traits that we've gained as Generation X, and that we're well poised to step into leadership roles in a decade ahead or so.
I love that you used the word stakeholders. Not that it's a monumental word, but you said something that strikes a chord with me because there are a lot of stakeholders in business. But as you said, Gen Xers also know how to manage. We do nothing but stakeholder management in your own life when it comes to your children, your family, crises you may go through, managing school alone, for example, and what your child may need in a school system or whatever it may be, caregivers for your family, and you add that skill set with business. I think that's really interesting to put that comparison together. So for folks who are watching this now, and most of you do watch later, stakeholder management, I think, is a great phrase to use when you're thinking about opportunities and jobs because you are managing quite a bit. And now to go back to Ford, you said something else that I thought was really interesting about Gen X. What was it? Quietly capable? Okay.
Yes.
So I mentioned this in one of my blurbs in letting folks know about today's discussion, and I may have written it in jest, but here's what really stuck out to me about you when I first knew of you. Because I'll be honest, I was living in Chicago, and I was from the Metro Detroit area, and here comes this guy from Boston going to lead social at Ford, and I was like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Is he going to be able to really encompass the Motown spirit? Because even being away, I was always kind of, looking over the lake to see what's happening in Detroit and making sure that my home state was okay. And what stuck out to me about Scott was South by Southwest. This guy who was a director who was leading this division for this big, huge company was literally offering to pick up people in cars. And I thought, wait a minute. Okay, hold on a second. I didn't believe it. So when I saw this trending on Twitter and the local Twitter, Twitter celebrities or Twitter folks, Armanos and whatnot, who we all came up with. By the way, David will be on the show soon. Had said this is happening. And there you were, Scott, picking up people at South by and taking test drives in cars. I'll call a spade a spade. I respected what you were doing, but it wasn't until I realized that you were actually driving people yourself that I thought, all right, this guy to me now is Detroit. Nothing against Boston, but knowing the grit of Detroit and just things from scratch, when you partook in that activity, I went, okay, all right. I was amazed. So talk to me about that experience with the driving people, how you managed it, how that idea came to be. Because again, at first it was really, no, they're not. No, it's not. And it was true. I thought that was pretty rad.
Well, first of all, thank you for noticing that. I'm glad you did, and I'm glad it had the impact that it did. It wasn't something we intended to do, at least that year, at scale. It was just a very kind of one-to-one outreach. And the thing is, when you do things like that aren't necessarily scalable, but that are a surprise, it grabs people's attention. It's worthy of remark. There were a few times where I would, track what's going on Twitter, and I've got, a customer or potential customer of Ford back in Boston who has owned 4 or least 4 Audis in a row and is finally taking a test drive in a new Ford Edge. And, I remarked to him, and he said, "Oh, you should have the CEO call me and really sell me on this." I go, "All right." So I sent a message to Alan. I go, "Hey, Alan, here's this person's number. Call him up." And, I wasn't recording it. I wasn't live casting it, live streaming it or anything like that. Just, one-to-one.
Surprise and
This
delight.
guy was blown. That's exactly it. He was blown away. He sees a 313 number coming in. He's like, "What's this?" He picks it up. "Hey, it's Alan Mullally, CEO of Ford." And Alan chatted with him for like 20 minutes, just wanted to know his story, wanted to know what his life was like. And this guy has been buying Fords ever since, right? So it's one of those things that it doesn't necessarily scale, but he'll tell this story to everyone. He'll write it on his blog. He'll share it with people. It's the long tail. Same thing at South by. I was down there because I had been a South by attendee before, so I continue to go. Well, let's innovate. Bring a vehicle. We did the same thing when we started bringing non-automotive bloggers to the Ford test track for our annual events. Let's break out of the same old and try something new. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Well, you start small like that and you see what works, and then you begin to grow it and amplify it. And suddenly you've got all your competitors kind of piling on. And you go, "Well, we have to do this too." And if you notice, the year after that at South by, GM went in and basically bought out the whole event so that no other automakers could come down there. And I think that's because one of the rides I gave at South by that year was to Christopher Barger, my nemesis at GM. And I actually got a picture of him in a Ford Flex. And he never lived that down. So Chevrolet, GM went in and they bought out all of South by the year after. So Ford was locked out by necessity.
I do remember
That's how you know you're successful.
Chris gave me a test drive in Chicago at Blog Her. I think there's a picture of me and him in front of a yellow Camaro. I was pregnant with my first. I have to equate things in my mind with pregnant during certain years with children, but that's when that happened at Blog Her. And before I forget, Sugar Jones just commented on LinkedIn. So many of us met you, Scott, there. He drove friends and me around just to learn about the car. So again, folks still remember that you did that. And the two things that you said stick out to me right now: long tail, and it didn't scale. My word. I remember a conversation I had with an executive in one of my former jobs, and I was talking about Target and shopping at Target and how I would escape, time away from my kids when I had newborns. I'd go to Target, I'd go get a coffee, I'd walk around, I maybe buy a candle, I just shop. This is before the Holderness family. This is before people were TikToking about shopping at Target. All of that. And so I remember the exec had said to me, "Well, how would you scale that idea?" Like, I don't know, but it's a thing. We women, we do this. Moms do this. But I'm just letting you know, this consumer insight, this is a thing that people do. And oftentimes I find in a typical corporate setting, the first question people ask is how it will scale. When I was at Motorola, I led social comms there, and I had no budget. Zilch, zippity-doo-dah. Nothing. I remember having friends with, being friends with coworkers, and my friend Art, who is the head of advertising, gave me $15,000. Thank you, Art. My friend who was the head of event planning at Motorola worked with me. Somehow we convinced Nordstrom to let us do a fashion show at Nordstrom We got models at not a lot of fee. And I had a fashion show of Motorola devices with in your athletic wear, in your evening wear, different Motorola devices with these women. And I invited all of these local Chicago lifestyle bloggers to attend. Was that nationwide? Nope. But the content, the information, the ability for them to take photos, to really interact with the brand wasn't scalable if we duplicated it across the cities. But the work I had to do to get $15,000 to have an event to highlight devices and bring it to the masses in a social way, it was like tooth and nail. But sometimes, to your point, things don't always have to scale. If you just let it do its thing and the folklore and the storytelling and the experiences resonate post fact, like your buddy buying the car, like Sugar mentioning she still remembers that. It's so important and so powerful.
It absolutely is. And I think it's just that proof of concept. You find somebody who's willing to take a chance on you. And I know I've been in a position where I've had to take chances on people, where I've seen people who maybe saw things a little differently than I did. And to me, that was a gift. It was a gift because somebody helped me live, even for a moment, through their eyes rather than through mine, and see a different part of the world, see a section of the internet that exists that I had no idea that existed, see a segment of people that we could touch that we've never touched before. And I think being able to do that perspective shifting, that flexibility is really what we're talking about. And again, being in the middle, you have to be nothing if not flexible, looking up, looking down, looking sideways at various generations and people around you, and being willing to change your perspective and change your plans sometime. That was one of the beauties at Ford, is that we had our plans. There was, of course, the overall plan that Ford had, the One Ford plan. And then that cascaded down. So every division, every department, every region had its version, and what you were doing had to fit into the bigger plan. The whole concept with that, reviewing that week in and week out, though, which, I mean, you could do that with family meetings the same way, is what has happened in the marketplace, in the industry, that could affect how we execute our plan. And we acknowledge reality. Well, the world isn't the same this week as it was last week, or this year as it was last year. So what do we need? We need a better plan, right? So we were always kind of moving and improving and being flexible about how we executed to be responsive to the world around us.
There was a joke that was more like I called it a 3-2-1 executive joke I would do. I remember situations where certain executives would go golfing, or they would be at an outing with other executives, and they, talk, have lunch, have drinks, whatever it may be. I remember being at my desk and saying, within the next few days, I'm going to get a phone call about why aren't we doing this? Because the executives got together over golf, over Mai Tais, whatever. Well, we're doing this. Well, we bought ads on this network, or we're doing this digital marketing strategy. And then the executive I would work with would ruminate on it and then call me up and bark on the phone with, why aren't we doing X, Y, and Z? And in my head, I'm thinking, man, that is such a nuanced response. There's reasons. And then I'd think, okay, they just had lunch with so-and-so, or they just read Ad Age, or they just saw the cover of Ad Age about another brand in the same vertical. Yeah. Why aren't we doing that? Do you think that type of quick knee-jerk reaction to marketing back then that we may have experienced is happening today?
It never stopped. And that's what I call GMOT, GLOT. It's an acronym. It's when it's colloquially known as shiny object syndrome, right? GMOT stands for get me one of those, right? The executive sees what their competition is doing, or sees it in Ad Age. We've got to have one of that. We have to be doing that. Get me one of those, right? GMOT. Not every, but almost every executive I've come across that I've coached has some form of ADHD. They are distracted so easily. They're high energy. They thrive on all kinds of crisis or change or things happening, and they get distracted easily. And my job as a coach, as a leader, this is part of timeless leadership, is keeping people focused on the through line. Whatever the vision is or the strategy is, that doesn't change. Your tactics may change from time to time, but if you are coming in and telling me I need to do this now, and it's completely sideways from what our vision or strategy is, well, it makes no sense. And to always have that discussion and go back, okay, here's what we're
Hmm.
focused on, here's what we need to accomplish. The how we accomplish it will always continue to change, but using that as your basis of the conversation, and somebody comes in and goes, get me one of these, I go, well, does that really fit with what we're trying to do? Right? Or I'd be happy to try it and let's see what the results are, but we're only going to do it for a limited amount of time rather than shifting all of our focus and shifting all of our resources to support the greatest shiny object.
I just love Gmoot. You need to make a t-shirt or something for that. Get me one of those. It's hysterical.
Get me, well, I wrote about that back in like 2007 on my blog. And again, this is the reason I moved away from social media and communications and more into
Hmm.
leadership coaching, is because I see the same mistakes happening over and over and over again. And as a classics major, I realized, you know what, this is human nature. We've been the same kind of people for thousands and thousands of years. The technology changed, society changed, but we still focus on the same kinds of things, and the same emotional drivers affect us wherever we are in the world and whenever we are in the world.
You said something at lunch to me that I was thinking about on the drive home, and you just said something that's a great segue to that about being a worldly a part of the world as a human. You had mentioned from a leadership perspective something that Alan Mulally did with his soldiers, if you will, the meetings. You mentioned something about the meetings and certain times of the week you all would meet. And can you talk about that? I think that was really interesting too, about how he got everyone on the same page in that direction. Of course, now that you mentioned the 2008 time you started and the line of being profitable at a certain point, now I'm understanding why he probably had the meetings that you'll share right now. It struck me very process driven, but it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. The process is called the BPR, the Business Plan Review. And the idea is that there's, a plan for the company. And then, of course, marketing, communications, legal, IT, all of the divisions have their own version of the plan. And Alan held these 3-hour long global meetings. Right? It was in the Thunderbird room up on the top floor of the Ford World headquarters over in Dearborn. And everybody around the table, it was a matrix organization. So you had your regional representatives and then you had your divisional representatives. And every leader around that table had 5 minutes to give an update on their part of the plan. And it was a round table thing, and everybody had to participate. There was no getting out of it. This was required attendance. And one of the genius things Alan did when he got there was said, okay, we're going to do this from 7 to 10 every Thursday morning. And if you don't want to be part of it, well, it doesn't make you a bad person, but it just means you're not a good fit for our team anymore. So people would self-select out. Alan didn't have to fire anybody when he got there, which helped his persona and his reputation extraordinarily. And when we go through that BPR process, everybody color codes their plan and highlights. You're not going through every single thing, but the highlights, things that change, things that need attention. Red, green, or yellow. Ford, up until that time, had been very fractured. Knowledge was hoarded rather than shared. And Alan's mantra was, we have to work together. We have to collaborate in order to succeed. And we have to be transparent about the problems we're having so we can help each other out. So the first meeting that Alan did in the BPR, everybody's charts were green. And Alan goes, well, all right. And he let everybody go through their plan. He goes, but let me get this straight. We're on track to lose $17 billion this year, and everybody's doing great. I think we need a little more honesty. So the next week, everybody comes back, and they got to the head of the Americas division, largest region in the company, and he had a big red spot on his chart. The escape launch in South America was off. And everybody looked around the table in the Thunderbird room and they wondered if the double doors were going to burst open and security was going to haul this executive out for admitting his failure. But Alan stood up and he clapped for this executive and he said, "This is the kind of transparency and vulnerability that we need to see here if we're going to improve. Now, who's going to help him out?" And all of a sudden, from around the table, an engineer from Europe, a designer from Mexico, people started saying, "We've seen this before. We can help out. We can get it back on track in a couple of weeks." Well, the next week at the BPR, they showed up, and Alan, according to Alan, everything was lit up like a rainbow, with everybody admitting where they needed help. And that process, everybody was dedicated to the process. They bought into it, and they were honest with themselves and with each other. And what that did is it created a sense of trust within the organization. It meant people were looking out for each other, not just themselves. And it started to turn the culture at Ford Motor Company around in a way that you couldn't have done without that kind of engineering, process-driven kind of approach. But it was very human-based in its execution.
That's amazing. And there's so many aspects of that anybody could use today in terms of how they manage a team, whether it's 3 people or 10. I think folks, especially leaders, are often afraid to say if something is off or if it's wrong or it's not on track. I don't know if I love the idea of working remote, but I don't know if it's also a matter of people not being together as often, if there's more of that, not hoarding of information, but fear of being so transparent. So I appreciate that. And I think that when anyone watching now or later can take that skill set, I think you just provided a really valuable nugget for someone to review how they manage people. In your leadership, were you going to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that Alan used to say, and I fully believe it, is that you can't manage a secret. And if you want to keep, if you've got a program or a process or even a relationship that's going sideways on you and you internalize it, I mean, you don't bring it up, you don't share anything about it, it's only going to eat away at you. It's going to eat away at your people. And being able to be in a safe place where failure is acceptable. And I know there's a lot of places that go, "Oh, we say it's okay to fail," and then somebody fails and they get fired for it. Well, then you need to match your actions to your words, right? And Alan showed that kind of integrity, that kind of let's call it industrial integrity or corporate integrity, was important. That if he said that people needed to be honest about where they failed, then they were going to get backed up by people who were going to help them out of that jam. Now, doesn't mean you're going to tolerate failure over and over and over again from the same person, but it means that you've given somebody a chance. And quite frankly, that's what most people look for, is to be given a chance, a second chance at redeeming themselves, at showing what their team is capable of, at righting the ship. Alan just understood fundamentally, how people needed to be treated. Part of his mantra was to first seek to understand and then to be understood, to love your employees up, show them that you care about them, right? And that was 10, 15 years ago, back before we were talking more about soft skills over hard skills. And that's from an engineer. That's the thing that really gets in my head, is that this engineer is unlike any engineer I've ever met, because he really led from the heart.
So your travels with different companies and projects the last few years have, put you over the gamut all over the place. And I've seen, all the different brands you've worked with, and without, disclosing or, without hurting any privacy or rules or whatnot you have with these companies, give me, I'd say, 3 to 5 top trends you've been seeing in leadership today, whether it's good or bad, any type of shifts. Just curious with what you're seeing trend wise. Is, are people taking the time because of all these new technologies we have with AI and TikTok and Reddit and Insta? Is there this race, even in leadership, to give me one of those? What are you seeing in leadership today?
I mean, that drive, I think, is here even more intensely than it has been in the past, particularly as it relates to AI. I think that's the latest magic elixir that people want to consume, and they think it's going to unlock all kinds of untold secrets about their company and help them succeed. It's the same thing we dealt with social media or TikTok, or it is not a get rich quick scheme. You do need to understand it. You do need to understand how it's affecting your people and ways you can use it to improve the experience for people. But fundamentally, if you don't have the basics right, it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
matter. This is, I said this years ago at a conference that people were asking about social media, and I said, don't fix the marketing, fix your product first. Deal with the fundamentals. We dealt with this at Ford, where early on in my time there, the executive team or the board said, we've got a PR problem. And our chief communications officer, hats off to him, he pushed back and he said, no, we don't. We have a business problem. And until we address the business, until we address the root cause of what it is that is why we're being perceived the way we're being perceived, it's going to remain. And no amount of PR, communications, spin, whatever you want to call it, is going to change that. And I think the same thing, I say this over and over again to leaders. Yeah, you can use AI to help with content generation at your company, to help tell your story better. But if you don't have a good story, and if you aren't connecting with people and you aren't taking care of your people in the first place, then no amount of AI is going to be able to shine over or gloss over what it is that you're doing wrong.
I just watched, I forgot, Nick, I forgot your last name, the CEO of The Atlantic. As you know, when we talk about AI, a lot of
Mm.
companies now, houses are striking deals with OpenAI. I've lost track. Vox is the latest one, The Atlantic, Dash Meredith, Wall Street Journal. They are now cutting deals whereby they are paying, no, I'm sorry, OpenAI is paying them to be able to use their publications to train the models. So in essence, Jane Doe eventually can go to ChatGPT and I would like reviews on striped shirts. And those news results can come within ChatGPT versus going to the site proper. What do you think of that? It's happening so fast. What do you think about those partnerships next? And I also know that you read a lot. You are a creature of information. What are your thoughts on all those partnerships launching where people could just find it all via ChatGPT?
I've got a mixed opinion on that. One, obviously, it becomes so more
Mm-hmm.
convenient for us. And I've certainly used the search results. I'm still an old-fashioned
Mm-hmm.
Googler, but now the top results are no longer sponsored ads. They are the AI
Mm-hmm.
results, and it's a great summary for
Yeah.
what's out there. But of course, in recent weeks, we've seen AI recommending people put glue on pizza to help the cheese stick better. It was a meme on Reddit that one of these
Mm-hmm.
LLMs scraped, and they incorporated it into the search results. Again, I think it's valuable to be able to get that kind of Cliff's Notes version. I'm a curious person, so I don't just rely on what's fed to me at the top. I like to go down rabbit holes. I like to dig. I like to find out more. But most of the public does not. Most of the public, and I watch my kids swiping, furiously through content on their phone. And I'm like, how can you consume information that quickly? How can you have a deeper understanding of things? And I think we are at a danger of losing the patience and reflection that people need to take with some of this
Mm-hmm.
stuff because they're simply looking for what's the quick answer? What's the easy solution? How can I accomplish my goal that much more quickly? So, like anything, it's not black and white. There's this dichotomy between the usefulness and the danger that these technologies provide us. And we need to continue to monitor it and use it to the best of our ability.
That sums up how I feel because that's exactly how I feel. I like to go down deeper rabbit holes. I use ChatGPT for certain ideations, if you will. It'd be nice if it came up, but my next thoughts
Sure.
are, is it the article and is the writer of that article going to be highlighted? Well, if Jane Doe is writing the piece on my shirt, will she be cited? Affiliate marketing. We all know that commerce and affiliate marketing is driving so much of ad revenue today. I know it makes affiliate marketers happy as well, because the Chat GPT result for this shirt could also have an embedded affiliate link. I could purchase it, a commission is paid. I never went to the site proper. So that's intriguing. But I agree with you on, is it going to make us that much more impatient? Which drives me to something else I want to talk about while we have time. You obviously are a parent. You're also a husband, and you have an amazing brood. As I've watched them kind of grow up over the years with social media, and they're in varying ages right now. Given your deep experience in communications technology, and you're still in it, how is it for you being a parent of kids who are different ages? And how do you have any tips for parents when it comes to device control, when it comes to limiting? I'll admit it, with my 11-year-old, I just figured out how to do it, Scott. I have a Pixel, and I just realized I can shut off the Wi-Fi to their devices in a second. So I started doing that. I started shutting off Wi-Fi at certain times to make them to finish other chores, or because it was getting
Yep.
so time consuming. What are your thoughts in general about parenting and devices and technology?
So when each of our kids was old enough to have their own phone, we actually put a family contract in place, an agreement they had to sign about the usage rules of the phone. No phones at the table during meal times, no phones at restaurants. Don't engage with people that you don't know. About a dozen or so different guidelines like that, and where the phones have to be at night and when they shut them off and all the rest. It was part
Mm-hmm.
safety, part education, and part getting them used to having some responsibility around this. We kind of imbued that early on. The challenge I've seen from my older kids, I've got 20, 18, just turned 18 last weekend, and 10. So the boys, the older ones, one of the things I've noticed with them is, and I don't know if this is endemic throughout that generation or if it's just them, a lack of curiosity in terms of chasing down answers, like you and I were talking about,
Mm.
going down those rabbit holes. They just accept for face value what's in front of them. Or they ask me, "Hey, Dad, how do I do something?" I go to Google. You're carrying around a
Yes.
supercomputer in the palm
Same.
of your
Same.
hand. I used to have to go to the I used to have to wait to go to the library the next day to get an answer if I needed it. I mean, you guys, you have the entire world at your fingertips here, and you won't actually use it to its fullest capacity. So I'm trying to do that with them. I'm trying to instill upon them the importance of answering their own questions and being responsible for themselves. Also recognizing that they consume information in far different ways than I ever will. And that's fine. I'm not expecting them to read my newsletter. They're not expecting me to scroll through TikTok and the rest. But I will say one thing, and that is that I want to leave them with a legacy of the things that are important to me, the things that I value, the character traits that I want to instill in them. And as a result, I've got 3 leather notebooks, journals that I bought when
Oh,
each of them
wow.
was born. And as they've grown, I've started filling it with, observations and advice and everything. And when they are ready to leave the nest, each of them will receive this as kind of Dad's handbook, Dad's thoughts and tips and all the rest. And hopefully I've set them in the right direction. And long after I'm gone and long after my website disappears, they'll still have these to maybe pass on to their kids as
That is
well.
fantastic, Jane. And the fact that you had the similar foresight when you were at Ford and saw Ford and how they were rebuilding, paying back what they borrowed, coming back profitable, social media coming together. You saw, hey, let me leave something for the kids in this way. And you're doing it with your hand. You're actually writing it out. Separate topic, but I do think the idea of cursive is just slowly going away, and it makes me so sad because I
Yeah, they may need a Rosetta Stone to translate this at some point,
well,
you
I
know?
think that's I like the contract. I like the written contract, and I don't think it's too late if you're a parent to instill that contract. We have rules like no phones at the table, no phones at restaurants. When the kids were small, we never took iPads either. I would have a bag of coloring books and whatever it may be. Both of them are avid readers right now, almost to a fault, because we go to the library, they check out books, and they're done. It's also why I'm also, caught in the middle, because I like to buy books from bookshops. So I like to buy books, but then the kids will go through the book so quickly. So it's this, constant circle. And that's helpful in terms of advice that you
Yeah.
provided. I think that, again, this conversation's chock full of advice about leadership, how to marry old technologies with newer technologies when it comes to communication and kids. And as we kind of close out our chat, do you think that we as Gen Xers have, how do I put this the way I want to put it? I think we talked before, we're both kind of bullish on Gen X. And I wonder, because of all the experiences Gen X has, you mentioned stakeholders, you mentioned leadership, you mentioned managing up, managing down. Do you think that there's also an opportunity for Gen Xers, more of us, to consider starting things, whether it's starting businesses or working for themselves? And do you think that we're just so risk averse that we don't do it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely think there's an opportunity. The question is the
Mm,
appetite. And there's a couple of different ways that people come to realize this. One is having that bug, having that entrepreneurial spirit, and now having so many different tools, technologies, and a support system in place to allow them to do this, things that we didn't have even 10, 20 years ago. So it's easier than ever to start your own thing now. At the same time, we are of a generation that watched parents, maybe even some colleagues, who were cradle to grave in the same company, maybe in the same town, right? So they were very comfortable and complacent in a world that didn't require them to change. Well, there is comfort in having that safety net of working for a big company and having your health care taken care of, and knowing that you've got a steady paycheck coming in. But guess what? That company isn't always going to be there for you, because loyalty is not a two-way street
yep.
in corporate America, in any place anymore. And I think people are being forced into having to start their own things now, which is unfortunate. But again, they've got the ability. Whether or not they have the desire, they have the ability now to do it more than they ever have. Whether you've got a desire, an itch for it, or you're being forced into it, I think it's good news that more people can and will start their own
And that
things.
is a great kind of summary to thoughts on Gen X and also the chat that we just had. So, Scott, thank you for taking the time to join me on this Thursday. And for folks who tuned in to watch now or will tune in later when this replays itself, I've learned so much from talking to you, not just at lunch, and just more about you personally and what brought you to your journey and how your journey continues. Speaking of that journey, can you let folks know how they can get in touch with you, whether it's the podcast or the site? Feel free to drop any URLs.
Sure. I mean, you can contact me as Scott Monty, wherever you are, scottmonty.com. I am Scott Monty all over the socials. So have at
And
it.
with that, Scott, thank you so much. Everyone, have a great rest of your Thursday. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Subscribe and say hi.